and Ruby. Call 647. We'll remind you to please drink responsibly.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Fires raging on. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. Major wildfires are burning in Northern California amid triple-digit temperatures, scorching thousands of acres and destroying homes. The Beckworth complex continued to spread over the weekend, forcing evacuations across state lines into Nevada. It's one of several blazes burning across the West. Meanwhile, in the past week, there's been several shootings of police officers around the country.
3 officers responded to a call in Webster Parish, Louisiana. 2 officers escaped unharmed, but one is dead after being shot in the head. Officer William Earl Collins Jr. served the Doyle Line Police Department. In Indiana, police detective Greg Ferenczi died after being shot and killed during an ambush outside a federal building. In Chicago, one man faces federal charges after allegedly shooting 2 federal agents and a city police officer. Bullets wounding one ATF agent in the hand, striking the other in the torso, and grazing the officer in the head.
Fox's Alex Hogan. President Biden will host city leaders from around the country to talk about reducing crime. The AP reports the mayors of Washington, D.C. and San Jose, California, among others, will be joining the group meeting on Monday. Plus, former President Trump was the headline speaker at CPAC in Dallas, Texas on Sunday.
The former president began by criticizing the Biden policy of decreased border enforcement, but then recounted that while he was impeached, never once were Democrats held accountable for claims later shown to be not true.
I'm very disappointed that Bill Barr was unable to hold anyone accountable for the countless abuses of power by the Democrats.
Namely, the Russian collusion complaints and the phone call with the Ukrainian president that led to his first impeachment. Trump made no statement saying he was running for the White House again, though he urged electing conservatives to Congress in the midterms.
Fox's Evan Brown. America is listening to Fox News.
Get your shot and win big prizes, Guam. The Office of the Governor and the Guam Visitors Bureau presents Vax and Win, Guam. Protect our community by getting your shot and enter online at visitguam.com/vax for a chance to win. Starting June 14th through July 21st, weekly prizes of $10,000 cash and a brand new car will be given away to lucky residents who are fully vaccinated. That's 6 weeks of Vax and Win opportunities. Some conditions apply. Log on to visitguam.com/vax for official promo rules or to submit your entry today.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Well, this weekend's box office winner helping bring people back to the theaters.
Black Widow lures people into movie theaters. The first Marvel movie in 2 years, earning an estimated $80 million in domestic ticket sales this weekend and a combined $215 million with international and streaming sales.
At some point, we all have to choose between what the world wants you to be and who you are.
The studio says it's the largest domestic opening weekend since Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. Universal's F9 now in the second spot, adding almost $11 million this weekend. In third and fourth place, The Boss Baby, Family Business, adding $8.7 million. The horror film, The Forever Purge, with another $6.7 million. A Quiet Place Part 2 rounded out the top 5 with $3 million.
Fox's Chris DeMeo and billionaire Richard Branson making history Sunday, traveling in his own Virgin Galactic rocket plane.
Now, 9 days after this launch, another billionaire, Jeff Bezos, is set to also launch into space. Blue Origin, though, has pointed out that their spacecraft will go a little bit higher past the internationally recognized 62-mile mark of what's considered space. Either way, very big moment for both companies as this huge step, really, for commercial spacecraft and space tourism.
Fox's Jeff Paul, and we're one step closer to seeing a grand slam in men's tennis.
The Year of the Joker continued Sunday on center court at the All England Club.
A sixth Wimbledon title for the Serbian superstar.
Sound courtesy of Wimbledon and ESPN. Djokovic closing out the win over Matteo Berrettini in 4 sets, 6-7, 6-4, 6-4, 6-3 to earn his 6th Wimbledon title and his 3rd consecutive. With the victory, Djokovic tied his 2 rivals, Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, for most men's singles slam titles all time with 20. Djokovic could complete the calendar Grand Slam with a win at the U.S. Open in September.
Fox's Ryan Mayer, I'm Mary Corsetti, and this is Fox News.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Bank Pacific. Happy 67th anniversary. Viva Bank Pacific!
Bank Pacific, serving our Pacific communities for 67 years. Where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahase.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Here we are again, the top of the week, the very beginning of 5 more days of Tall Tales. It just doesn't get any better than that. Hosea and I just spent 2 days in the wilderness, no Tall Tales, no tailgaters, no halftime show. It was real deprivation, but we're back now, and we're happy, right, Jose?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, we couldn't be any happier than we are at the beginning of a brand new week with a whole week of Tall Tales ahead of us. So let's start out with the way we always start here with Zemi Ikotny. And you'll recall Zemi Ikotny is my backwards bilingual play on words. Literally translated, Zemi Ikotny means press the meat. We turn it around to say meet the press, and it's our local equivalent of meet the press, except it's so much better than Chuck Todd on PMSNBC. I look at each of the editorials. I use my blue pencil, correct mistakes in grammar, English usage, theory, whatever is necessary. Having finished doing that with both editorials, I sometimes give the coveted blue star to the better of the two. The blue star never goes by default. Lately, I have not been awarding it to either editorial on more than one occasion. So let's start out with the Daily News. Here's the headline in the Daily News headline. Our view. Judiciary can't afford passage of Bill 112. A measure that would eliminate the mandatory arbitration requirement for medical malpractice claims and replace it with a pre-trial screening by a magistrate judge, Bill 112, is a very bad idea. I've got to interrupt here. No, it's not a very bad idea.
Nope.
This kind of reminds me of a key scene at the Emerald City The Wizard of Oz. You'll recall that Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Lion and the Tin Men were all quaking in fear of the big screen presentation of The Wizard of Oz when the dog, Toto, went over and pulled the curtain aside, and we could see that the Wizard of Oz was just a man pulling some levers, making all of the effects happen. And Dorothy went over there and said to him, you're a very bad man. And he said, no, I'm actually a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard. So, Bill 112 is not a very bad idea. It's a very good idea. Now, you may want to quibble with some aspects of the bill, but unless you think having the courthouse doors locked permanently to a segment of the population is a good idea, then you better not say that Bill 112 is a bad idea, because that's what Bill 112 seeks to do, unlock the courthouse doors to people who have been the victims of medical malpractice. Right now, people can't get in the courthouse because it costs about $50,000. So no blue star for you today when you start out with something like that. Bill 112 is a very bad idea. And then they go on to compound the error. It would mean doctors won't treat patients with conditions normally served by specialists. That would force patients to seek care off-island, which is expensive. It also would make it much harder to recruit and retain physicians. And the bill's sponsors apparently didn't check with the island's courts about the impact of the proposed measure. Yeah. You know, this is kind of like Tina thinking that all you have to do is write to the Supreme Court. Dear Supreme Court, would you please overrule the insular cases because we don't like the racist language you use. The court is not something that you write letters to and plumb the depths of its thought process. You know, they shouldn't, you know, no one checks with the court before they introduce legislation. Chief Justice Carbolito, noting his comments didn't reflect a position on Bill 112. If he didn't reflect a position on 112, I'd really hate to say the letter he put together that did reflect a position. This is like the script for some kind of TV sitcom or something like that. He said the judiciary wasn't invited to provide fiscal comment on Bill 112. No, that's not what he said. He said there was no fiscal note on Bill 112. Now, if you're going to write about this stuff, Daily News, you kind of got to know what you're talking about. Fiscal notes are put together by the Bureau of Budget and Management Research. Why they didn't provide a fiscal note, I don't know. I mentioned this before. Perhaps Senator Terlahi should have bird-dogged the BBMR to provide that note. She didn't. There was no fiscal note. And ordinarily, a bill is not supposed to go to the floor unless it's accompanied by a fiscal note. But you can't blame that. You can't say that the Chief Justice wasn't invited to provide a fiscal comment. You don't invite the Chief Justice to provide fiscal comments. And then we go on with the magic word simply. Simply doesn't have the budget or resources to effectively conduct pre-trial screening of malpractice claims. Well, he's not going to have a budget for it because it's not part of the law right now. This is kind of a normal progression. You don't create a budget for something that you don't do. The judiciary has a backlog of criminal and civil cases exacerbated by Wuhan virus pandemic and with the lifting of the moratorium on eviction and foreclosures, an influx of cases is expected. Magistrate judges would assume those cases and recently were allowed to handle proceedings that formerly required a Superior Court judge. Now, for not having stated a position on this, it's interesting how much of Chief Justice Carbolito's letter wound up as part of this editorial. On top of that, magistrates would need specialized training and education to weigh malpractice claims. This is just wrong. I don't care who says it, it's just wrong. Judges don't have special training in anything other than the law. Now, if you're concerned about what judges do and what judges know, it works like this. A judge nowadays has to be a lawyer, and nowadays, it hasn't always been this, but a lawyer has to be a graduate from college. And there's no prerequisite course that a lawyer must study in his undergrad days. You could be one of my best law professors, Charles Daniels, who recently retired from the Supreme Court of New Mexico, had a bachelor's degree in fine arts.
This is not the musician.
No, it's not the musician. He had a bachelor's degree in fine arts. So any bachelor's degree, any discipline would lend itself well to going to law school, because law school is not something that relies on the content of your brain housing group, which you at least partially filled during the time you were working on your bachelor's degree. It relies on your ability to use your brain housing group to analyze. That's what it's about. So courses that that enhance your ability to analyze, yeah, that's a good idea, but it's certainly not mandatory. When a lawyer gets to law school, you know, you hear people say, well, I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to concentrate on Pacific Island law. Well, again, it just doesn't work that way. Most lawyers study most of the same courses. There are electives in some cases where a lawyer could gain a little bit of a specialty. For instance, in New Mexico, there are a couple of courses in oil and gas law, the law of oil and gas, which is really real property. You probably wouldn't find courses in oil and gas at New York University in the heart of Manhattan. But you can't say, I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to specialize in oil and gas. It just doesn't work that way. Lawyers take the standard run of courses: criminal law, constitutional law, civil procedure, criminal procedure, etc. So when a lawyer graduates from law school, he's a generalist, and he's equipped to immerse himself in any area of the law. Now, lawyers bring themselves up to speed in the area of the law in which they are dealing by reading things called cases. You know, if you want to know about the law of discrimination in public schools, you might want to start out with Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, and so on. So lawyers don't, you know, there's this popular thought that if you went to the law library, you just knew which book to take off the shelf and which page to turn to. The answer for the question you're interested in would be there. No, it doesn't work that way. So lawyers, you know, get up to speed, and if you're dealing with medical malpractice, in the process of preparing your complaint for medical malpractice, you'll research the case law on medical malpractice. Same for judges. Judges don't climb onto the bench because Well, let's see, we've got 6 judges, and this guy's really hot on medical malpractice. And this guy over here, he's top-notch on car accidents. No, it doesn't work that way. If you study how the assignments in our Superior Court, they rotate. Every judge over a period of time handles every kind of case. The way the judges are able to deal with the complexities of their cases is by the papers that lawyers file with them. They file memoranda. And in that memoranda, there are recitations of case law. So a judge who goes into, as an example, if we had a case dealing with, we wouldn't do this, but if we had a case dealing with patent law, a judge could pick up the file for it, not know anything about patent law, but if he took it all the way to conclusion, by the time he got to the end, he'd know a lot about it, because it's the lawyer's job to educate the judge in the area of law in which they're looking for a decision. And, of course, each lawyer has his own sets of persuasions, et cetera, emphasizes parts of the law that favors his client, and vice versa. So to say that magistrate judges would need specialized training and education to weigh malpractice claims is just wrong. And even more basic than that, judges don't undergo training. Dogs do, right? And armies do, and soldiers do, et cetera. But judges, like a lot of other professionals, are not trained. They're educated.
This goes back, I think I said this on Friday's show, where the medical field kept saying, well, you don't know our profession, so stop speaking our profession. But this sounds like the opinion that was given during the hearings.
Yeah,
right.
It does.
They don't know the profession of the lawyer, so
yeah.
Really
Well, it's not there's not an equality of pairing. Lawyers should not talk about doctors' medical profession, but it's okay for doctors to talk about the legal profession. Exactly. You know why? They're doctors. Yeah. And then we compound the error. The judiciary has neither the funding nor the internal expertise to do that, Carbolito said. Well, it just goes to show you that my favorite quote from the U.S. Supreme Court, Robert Jackson, a Supreme Court justice appointed by FDR. Robert Jackson, once upon a time, was asked about the infallibility of the Supreme Court. Once you speak, that's it. That's definitive. And Robert Jackson said, that's true. He said, we are not final because we're infallible. We're infallible because we're final. So that just shows you that even a justice of the Supreme Court is not going to be right all the time. He says in this editorial, the judiciary has neither the funding nor the internal expertise to provide special training to magistrates. Well, you don't need that. And as far as the funding is concerned, you're not going to get the funding until the law requiring the courts to do these things is passed. The bill will also double review of malpractice claims because it would require filing of court action to initiate a claim, which would have an immediate and profound impact on operations. It's like, you shouldn't pass laws if the courts are going to have to do some judging. That's what the court is for. The Chief Justice said the court would need additional funds plus an additional magistrate judge. And I went into this in the Chief Justice's letter. That's what he could have said in his letter. He could have said, if this bill became law, these are the things we'll be asking you for. Not, this bill shouldn't become law because we don't have these things. He also asked that the measure passed that it not be put into effect until the year after enactment. That's about the only reasonable thing he said in his letter. Those pushing the bill say medical malpractice arbitration is too costly. They should then focus on ways to address arbitration costs without destroying our healthcare infrastructure or creating a bigger burden and additional cost to our already overburdened and backlogged judicial system. Well, I have a couple of ideas here. If the doctors are so hung up on arbitration, I haven't seen any doctors come forward and say, please amend the law so that a doctor electing arbitration would assume the cost of the arbitration. I haven't seen that, not even anything close to that. And if the courts are overburdened and backlogged, since the Chief Justice feels so comfortable in writing to the legislature, he might ask for some more money and some judges pro tem, to hire judges pro tem or another magistrate. Get rid of the backlog. Have night court. Have court on Saturdays. What a dismal performance. Yeah, no blue star today for you, PDN. Not even close. Let's take a short break and I'll go to the Post.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community. Get national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
This Liberation Day, join PBS Guam as we take you village to village, paying tribute to those who've made sacrifices for us to live as we do today. Tune in on July 21st at 9 a.m. and experience over 3 hours of exclusive interviews, musical performances, and more. This celebration of Guam's 77th will air on PBS Guam, KGTF, Channel 12, and streaming on the PBS Guam Facebook and YouTube pages. This special broadcast is made possible by PBS Guam, our generous supporters, and Choice Broadcasting.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Okay, so here we are with the Post. A rather strangely worded headline today in the editorial in the Post. Here's how it reads. The distance of time shouldn't erase the recognition of pain, strength of Guam's greatest generation. The distance of time. We have some sort of quantum mechanics undertaking here. I don't think time has a distance.
No. Relative, but no.
You can talk in terms of the distance you could travel in a period of time, but if I were to ask one of our callers, how far is an hour? It just doesn't come out very well, does it? Here's what the editorial says. As pandemic restrictions ease for tourists and businesses, we are also glad to see that more people are allowed to attend the various memorial services held to honor the suffering and bravery of our people during Guam's wartime occupation. We are glad to see that more people are allowed to attend various memorial services. You need permission to go to a memorial service? You do, huh?
Apparently.
They give a chance to keep one of the most important, albeit tragic, chapters of our island's history alive. It helps to balance the scale so the liberation season keeps its deeper meaning among celebrations, barbecues, and parades. Most of us on island are younger than 77 years old, so these events are necessary for many to hear for ourselves the evil our Manamku endured, as well as the stories of humanity, hope, and faith in the face of horrific atrocities. Some of our war survivors are able to attend in person, too, which is a marked improvement. Last year, all services but one were scrapped, while the island was in early months of the Wuhan virus health emergency. It's important for Guam's greatest generation to be able to honor their loved ones who didn't make it to July 21, 1944. For my wife, that was two people, a sister and a niece. Yeah. And those who have died since then. It's just as important for us who benefit today from their sacrifice more than 70 years ago to take their stories to heart. During the past week, island leaders, military officials, and our Manamku gathered in Menengung, paying homage to the thousands of people who were forced to march from all over Guam to the southern concentration camp. I can't forget Menengung. I cannot do that, not when you lost loved ones, survivor Rosita Lisama Taitano Birdwell told the Post. You miss a lot of people. Some people were beheaded. I knew them. Birdwell was just 6 years old at the time, and her experience is one of the many we can learn from, if we take the time. There are archives of interviews from decades past documenting accounts of survivors who were old enough to recount forced labor, murder, and oppression. Hours and hours of stories are available telling how Chamorro families risked their lives for Americans, for their church, and for each other. How men and women who lived through cave bombings hid underneath dead bodies until it was safe to move. How even during their lowest point in their life, our people still found strength individually and collectively. The stories may be upsetting, unsettling, and unnerving, but they should be. Guam and her people were caught in the crossfire of war. We should not turn a blind eye to this dark chapter of Guam's history, most of all when our island remains gripped by a global pandemic, when our patience and resilience are being pushed to their limits. My patience gets pushed to the limits very, very. You don't need a pandemic for that. Resilience, that's something else. We can take this time to search the Post's website, YouTube, Guampedia, and the governor's Facebook page to hear from our survivors in the past. And as we commemorate the 77th anniversary of Guam's liberation from the Japanese occupying forces, we can tune in to the live broadcasts of this year's services. Perhaps being reminded of or learning of these experiences for the first time can help us in our current time of need. We can be inspired to forge on to tomorrow or gain insight that puts our own problems into new perspective. And we can all build a faith that we will see our island and people through to better days, just as we did before. Time does indeed heal wounds, but we all should know the stories behind the scars. Kind of like it. And I have to say this. This is the kind of thing that one would expect on Liberation Day. There's no harm in recognizing the 1,548 United States Marines who were killed in the process of taking this island away from the Japanese either. But I know it happens every year that there will be a certain corner of the population here that will beat up on Liberation Day. The usual critical race theory rants, the usual separatist rants, we weren't really liberated, we're not free yet, on and on and on. So I commend the Post for talking about what Liberation Day is really about.
I challenge them when the Afghans come here to swap stories of freedom. with them and compare and contrast.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to the card. And I've mentioned before that this is a knotty problem, Knotty, knotty problem. The medical malpractice issue, the triple MAA, Mandatory Medical Malpractice Arbitration Act, versus the lack of access to the courts, to the courthouse. Yeah, to the court. And I haven't weighed in. I want to listen some more. I probably offer my own suggestions somewhere down the line. But I do want to take the opportunity to make the arguments of both sides when I have the chance, if something presents itself. For once, I'm a little bit impartial on this. Not completely, but a little bit. You know, being a lawyer and everything, I like to see the courthouse doors flung wide open. Yeah, I know what the guy over there in Lazy Boy's saying. Yeah, that's a typical lawyer. All he's concerned about is more money. Yeah, and of course I have to come back with my usual line. Anything that generates fees for lawyers can't be all bad. First item on the card is Guam Memorial Hospital versus Dr. John Steele. Second, we have the governor versus Therese and the folks. And then Therese versus the Chief Justice, which we kind of got into in the editorial. And then I've got Troy over there in Candid News versus Matson, the shipping company. And then Wolf versus journalism. It's another example of how far south what we used to call journalism has gone, giving me once again the opportunity to bring up the call from a guy named Matt, who really gave me a reality check on my expectations for the media. I'm going to go into that again. So that's what the card looks like. John Steele, I talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I went in and dug some things out of the internet. Guam Memorial Hospital blames physician in wrongful death suit. The Superior Court of Guam has denied a physician's motion for summary judgment in a wrongful death suit in which Davina Alegria McNeil accused the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority of the wrongful death of John Edward McNeil and for negligent infliction of emotional distress. In response to the suit, GMH filed a third-party complaint against Dr. John Steele, alleging that the physician, a child and adult neurologist employed by GMH, here we go, acted outside the scope of his employment in performing a tracheostomy on John McNeil after he went into respiratory distress. I'll repeat the key here. John Steele alleging the physician, a child and adult neurologist employed at GMH, acted outside the scope of his employment in performing a tracheostomy. That's what the doctors have been complaining about, right? So I found the decision in order on Steele's a motion to dismiss the third-party complaint. Now, we got to refer to our law and order notebooks here for a minute here so you'll understand what a third-party complaint is. Let's start out with our usual parties, A and B. So let's say that A sues B for medical malpractice, right? And B then will file a motion to dismiss, will file an answer, will defend against A's suit. But if A wants to lay it off on somebody else, then they put together a complaint and summons and serve it on that somebody else. So there's like a lawsuit inside the lawsuit. This is called a third-party complaint. So A sues B. B says, well, it's really not us that's at fault. It's C that's at fault. So B files a third-party complaint against C. And that's exactly what happened here. In its complaint, GMH alleges that Dr. Steele acted outside the scope of his employment contract with GMH when he performed the tracheostomy on Mr. McNeil. GMH further alleges that Dr. Steele did not act as an agent of GMH when conducting the medical procedure and committed negligence and medical malpractice. Now, it's amazing. This is Judge Michael Berdaglio. And I never got around to checking his credentials to see how much training he'd had in medical malpractice cases. Yeah. And how much, who at the court gave him that training and how much it costs. Dr. Steele asserts that his response to McNeil's respiratory distress was authorized by GMHA medical staff bylaws because he was acting in an emergency situation. Dr. Steele contends that although a tracheostomy is outside his granted privileges, GMH's bylaws permitted him to conduct the procedure in Mr. McNeil's emergency situation. The staff bylaws of GMH provide the following: emergency clinical privileges, conditions. An emergency involving a particular patient, a physician currently appointed to the staff may be permitted by the hospital to act in such emergency by exercising clinical privileges not specifically assigned to him. When the emergency situation no longer exists, such physician must request the temporary privileges necessary to continue to treat the patient. In the event such temporary privileges are denied, or he does not request such privileges, the patient shall be assigned by the president of the staff or his designee to an appropriate person currently appointed to the staff. The wishes of the patient shall be considered in the selection of a substitute physician. Under the plain language of the bylaw, GMH may permit a staff physician to respond to an emergency with privileges not specifically assigned to him. Dr. Steele argues that the bylaws clearly and unequivocally permit professional staff physicians to provide life-saving care in emergency, even if the care is provided outside of established privileges. In response, GMH contends that Dr. Steele has failed to demonstrate that he had GMH's permission to act outside the scope of his privileges. Yeah. Hello, GMH. Oh, I'm surprised you actually answered the phone for once. Yeah. Yeah, this is John Steele up at the nursing facility. I have a patient here that's choking to death. He can't breathe. He'll be dead in probably about a minute if I don't perform a tracheostomy, if I don't cut a hole in his neck and stick a tube in there. Sir, I'm going to have to put you on hold. No, don't. If you put me on hold, this guy's going to die. Well, I have to refer you to the president of the medical staff, and he's not available right now. When will he be available? I have no idea. So what do you do if you're John Steele, right? And then if you read this thing carefully, it looks like it could be read to say that the permission is only necessary after the emergency. I could make that argument. Otherwise, do you really have an emergency procedure? Further, GMH Hospital Risk Management Program Officer Aurora Cabanero provided through a sworn declaration that, to the best of her knowledge, Dr. Smith was not permitted to act outside his established privileges and perform the tracheostomy. Doctor, the court determines that there is a genuine dispute with respect to whether Dr. Steele had GMH's permission, etc., which means no motion for the summary judgment isn't going to be granted. GMH has provided sufficient evidence to dispute Steele's contention that he was authorized to perform. The court finds that based on specific facts alleged by GMH, a reasonable jury could return a verdict in his favor. Accordingly, the court concludes that summary judgment is not appropriate at this time. So the case went on, and I wasn't able to find out how the case actually wound up. Maybe somebody out there in tailgater land would have more familiarity with that. So then I go back to this article that ran in the Post. A statement of facts in court documents says Steele served as the director of the skilled nursing unit at GMH, where John McNeil had been transferred for rehab after suffering a stroke. When John McNeil went into respiratory distress on January 2, 2012, a nurse asked Steele to help her obtain emergency medical transport. According to the documents, when Steele entered John McNeil's room, he determined that the patient's airway was obstructed and decided to perform a tracheostomy. Court documents state that the procedure successfully cleared John McNeil's airway. And Steele told nurses and medics not to move John McNeil until he stabilized. However, when McNeil was placed in the ambulance, the cannula, which is a tube that was inserted into his trachea as part of the tracheostomy, dislodged, and his condition began to worsen. In October 2017, Steele filed a motion for summary judgment asking the court to rule that GMH did not have a case against him. In February, Judge Bordallo denied Steele's motion after undergoing extensive training put on by the court in medical malpractice. Yeah. In his motion, Steele argued that he was acting within the scope of GMH bylaws for emergency clinical privileges, which state that in an emergency involving a particular patient, a patient currently appointed to staff may be permitted by the hospital to act in such emergency by exercising clinical privileges not specifically assigned to him. Well, you see what I mean by the wording of that, may be permitted by the hospital. In other words, if you do it, we're not going to come down on you. GMH alleged Steele has failed to demonstrate that he had permission. I think he's supposed to have a note from the president of the medical staff, right? It's got to be in writing.
Triplicate.
Yeah. So, pretty sad. Now, let's hypothesize for a moment here. Let's say that Steele, instead of doing what he did, said, I don't have permission to do this. Therefore, I better not do it, because if I do, I'm going to be in trouble. I'll try to call, but I know the chances of getting permission before McNeil dies are zero. And McNeil dies. And then the investigation, John Steele, you were right there when he died. You had all the surgical tools necessary to do a tracheostomy. What did you do? I'm a neurologist. You know, I'm not a surgeon. I'm not a pulmonologist, so I didn't do anything. Oh, I really feel sorry for the guy. They fired the guy in 2012 as a director of the skilled nursing home. According to the news article, it said, well, when they, I think it was Medicare came in and investigated, they found some discrepancies. But this whole this whole episode stands for the proposition that no good deed ever goes unpunished. So I don't know what happened to John Steele. He was a famous neurologist on the island because he's been here. He was here for like 30 years.
I met him a couple of times.
Yeah, very distinguished guy. You know, he always looked like he was on his way to church. He was dressed so nicely and had such fine manners. And wow, he's a Canadian on top of everything else.
Oh, that explains it.
Yeah. So, and he was doing extensive research in Litigo and Bodig. And what a way for a guy to wind up his career. But I don't bring this forward, you know, as a let's remember John Steele exercise. I bring it forward to say that, you know, if you got a hospital that's going to rat you out for doing what John Steele did, if you're going to turn against you like that, then, you know, maybe these fears are kind of well-founded. So, I have brought forward different items dealing with both sides of the controversy. This one is definitely for the doctors.
Just a real quick question before we go to break.
Yeah.
You're talking about third-party litigation.
Yeah.
Is that one way to protect themselves from the primary litigator? Is that the right terminology?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
they're trying to protect themselves from the patients.
Exactly. So what they're saying is that we don't owe this guy anything, this lady anything, but if we do, then Steele owes us. And by the way, you might want to amend your complaint and bring Steele as a party defendant. That's what they're saying. Wow. Yeah. So, you know, if I were a doctor and I knew, and I suspect every doctor knows about this, because he got a lot of press. Okay, short break, and we'll come back to Governor versus Therese and the folks.
Mescla, read all about it. Check out Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tucumán for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet, the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tucumán, Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
Attention men and women in uniform, veterans and reservists. Get ready for the 77th Liberation Hike and Bike. Get up and move with the Silkies Hike. And easy bike along Marine Corps Drive with stops at historic sites and monuments with a super hot cool down at Paseo. Hike rally at 7 a.m. on Liberation Day in Assen. Bike rally 7 a.m. at Paseo. Let's beat suicide with humor and camaraderie. Sign up at Eventbrite. Look for Silkies Hike Guam 1 and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Made possible by Gotcha 671, Irreverent Warriors, Freedom Grinders, and Veterans Helping Veterans.
Okay, so here we are. I've talked about this before. This is the governor versus Therese. The governor has come out and said she really hopes that Therese will withdraw her bill. And she says, quote, "I'm really hoping that the author of this legislation will listen and not put this bill on the floor." It's all in the name of separation of powers, of course. "And go back and meet with the doctors, meet with the ones that make testimonies, meet with the attorneys, meet with the consumers, and have a much better, well-rounded, and more comprehensive information about it, and see if there's something that can come out as a result of this." Well, you know, we have a government here, Governor, and the way we make hard decisions is not to have what Liz Warren would call a powwow.
Closed door meeting?
Yeah, and we don't do closed door meetings, so I can't think of a more chaotic way of dealing with this than getting everybody together in one big room and see who could holler the loudest. We have orderly procedures for dealing with these things. We have a way that the people are able to influence the direction in which their government goes. It's called the popular branch. Popular not meaning hooray for the legislature. Popular meaning it is the closest part of the government to the people. We put people in the legislature every 2 years, and it's their job to be sensitive to the people and what the people think ought to be done in order to make the territory function better. And I've given a lot of credit here to David Lebowski. He's the guy that started this whole thing with his persistence based on a really sad incident in his own life. So Therese Terlahi listens, hears, studies, thinks, etc., and concludes that because of the triple MAA, people are not able to get into the courthouse and file medical malpractice suits. Therese is a lawyer, and I think probably you'd have a hard time finding any lawyer who would argue publicly that we ought to restrict access to the courthouse. There are just too many people running over there and filing suits, and it's just not a good way to run a railroad, right? When actually the opposite is true. The way that in Western civilization, Western society, the dispute resolution that we came up with is courts, so that when people have disputes, arguments, disagreements, they can't resolve, they go to the court, and the court has developed different methods of resolving disputes amongst various people. The Anglo-American system, we've been working on the Anglo-American system, which we use here, for 1,000 years. And it works pretty good. It's not perfect, but it works pretty darn well. So legislatures introduce bills. In order to ascertain public input, they hold what are called public hearings. Members of the public come in, sit down, grab a microphone, and tell legislators the senators what they think senators should know. People can send in something in writing if they so desire. All of this testimony, whether it's oral or written, is compiled and put into a report called a committee report. It's usually digested and analyzed, and the committee comes up with a report indicating why the bill should or should not become law. And then the members of the committee sign off on it one way or another, and ordinarily the bill comes to the floor of the legislature. At that time, a thought process is engaged in, which if you have legislators, senators that have been paying attention, will air and discuss and analyze the various issues involved in the bill and conduct themselves in such a manner that they hope that we think they have arrived at a reasoned decision. That's all we can hope for. That's the way it works. You don't get everybody together in one big room and let them holler at one another. Governor, when the legislature finishes, if they pass the bill, they send it to you, and then you get your call. You can sign the bill into law, or you can veto it. But to butt in is what you did. You butted in the middle of the process, telling the Speaker of a co-equal branch, I hope you listen and withdraw this bill instead of horsing around over there at that building you call the legislature, that you just get everybody together and have a big talk fest. Yeah. Well, let's break for the halftime show here, and I'll come back to the governor right after the halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Protests in Cuba. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan posting to Twitter that the U.S. supports freedom of expression and assembly across Cuba and would strongly condemn any violence or targeting of peaceful protesters who are exercising their universal rights. It comes as thousands of Cuban protesters have taken to the streets demanding an end to the country's communist dictatorship. The Cuban people have been enduring food shortages and skyrocketing prices since the start of the pandemic. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is working to get Afghans who worked with the U.S. military out of the country ahead of next month's withdrawal.
President Biden says he intends to help thousands of Afghans who helped the U.S. military as translators and drivers escape the Taliban. The administration is considering third countries where Afghans could stay. One former translator says he is hoping the government doesn't send him back to Afghanistan.
My parents are farmers and their house has been burned. My uncle got killed.
Zalmay Niazi has been living in Iowa for several years, but his asylum request has not yet been accepted because he says as a child he helped members of the Taliban out of fear. An immigration judge is expected to rule on his asylum request. Jared Halpern, Fox News.
And former President Trump receiving a warm welcome while taking the stage Sunday at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Dallas.
Donald Trump's first few minutes on stage here at CPAC were spent highlighting facts of increased and unmitigated illegal border crossings here in Texas.
Now the Biden administration has turned the border into the single greatest disaster in American history.
Claiming crossings, drug, and trafficking crimes are up 1,000%.
We deported criminal aliens by the thousands, and we built almost 500 miles of border walls.
Stating the Biden White House is looking to open the border even more.
Fox's Evan Brown. America is listening to Fox News.
Big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community. Get national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Hafade, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahasi.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
A Virginia county plans to rename a major highway that currently shares a name with Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
The Arlington County Board in Northern Virginia said this weekend that it plans to vote this month to rename Lee Highway for abolitionist John Langston, who also was the first black person to be elected to Congress from Virginia. The highway, which also carries the US 29 designation not far from Washington, D.C., was named Lee Highway in the 20s. The new name would be Langston Boulevard. The name change would only cover the parts of Lee Highway that run through Arlington County. The county currently estimates the name change will cost about $300,000. Ted Lindner, Fox News.
And the Washington football team is set to get a new name at the start of 2022.
The Washington Post reports the team will reveal its new name and logo in early 2022. It will keep its burgundy and gold colors. The decision comes after 40,000 submissions from fans in multiple focus groups. The team will also reportedly move into a new stadium when its lease on FedEx Field expires in 2027.
Fox's Ashley Strohmeyer. Meanwhile, NASCAR racer Kurt Busch taking first place at the Quaker State 400 race at Atlanta Motor Speedway Sunday, beating out all his opponents, including his brother Kyle.
Kurt Busch is going to win the brother duel. He wins in Atlanta.
Sound courtesy of NBC Sports. The victory now giving Kurt Busch a place on the track for the Cup Series playoff races. Meanwhile, a close call for riders on a Carnival Park ride in Michigan.
It was supposed to be a fun time for people on the Magic Carpet Pendulum at the 95th Annual National Cherry Festival in Traverse City, Michigan Thursday night. But the ride started to sway back and forth and almost tipped over.
Oh, my God.
The ride appeared to come loose from its foundation, but other quick-thinking festival goers sprang into action. They leapt onto the base of the ride, their combined weight stopping the ride from tipping over. The ride was shut down and taken apart. Rob Dawson, Fox News.
I'm Mary Corsetti, and this is Fox News.
Get your shot and win big prizes, Guam. The Office of the Governor and the Guam Visitors Bureau presents Vax and Win, Guam. Protect our community by getting your shot and enter online at visitguam.com/vax for a chance to win. Starting June 14th through July 21st, weekly prizes of $10,000 cash and a brand new car will be given away to lucky residents who are fully vaccinated. That's 6 weeks of Vax and Win opportunities. Some conditions apply. Log on to visitguam.com/vax for official promo rules or to submit your entry today.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Bank Pacific. Happy 67th anniversary. Viva Bank Pacific!
Bank Pacific, serving our Pacific communities for 67 years. Where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
Mezcla, read all about it. Check out Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet, the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
Another terrific halftime show here on Tall Tales, and here we are back for the second half of Tall Tales, and we're still talking about the Lebowskis versus the doctors, right? That's how I divided the sides here the other day. And the doctors are using this stay in the lane analogy to describe the danger that they don't want to face. Doctors say, if I'm a pediatrician and I need the services of, say, an internist, we don't have any pediatrician internists here. So it may be very difficult to get an internist to come along and collaborate with the pediatrician. Now, doctors say they're able to do that now because the MMAA means they're not going to get sued. But they were afraid that if the MMAA weren't there, they could get sued because they would be performing in an area outside their expertise, which I analyzed on Friday, which means they know they're doing something that's wrong, but they're going to keep doing it so long as they can get away with it. So the MMAA is please allow us to continue to get away with it provision. But so the idea there is about doctors staying in their lane to avoid professional liability. John Steele is a really good example of that. Poor guy didn't stay in his lane. He thought maybe he could save somebody's life. And he could have had the ambulance crew perhaps. Well, we don't know what happened, but had that tube not come out, he would have saved somebody's life. So when it comes to staying in lanes, Governor, you should stay in your lane. You get your chance after the legislature is done. If they pass it and send it to you, you can veto it. And if testimony concerning the executive branch is necessary, you could send your people to testify, and they can carry water for you over there. But for you to come out and say, I'm hoping that the author of the legislation will listen. Stay in your own lane. Chief Justice, a senator writes you a letter basically saying, can you think of any reasons why this bill shouldn't pass? And you write back and you go right back and give the senator all kinds of ammunition, which I suspect that she's going to be waving around on the session floor.
Or find some lackey to do it for her.
Yeah, like Jim Moylan. Yeah, Jim, I've got another stink bomb to throw at the legislature, but I did the last one. Can you help me out? Here's the stink bomb. Can you take it over, throw it in there for me? So, Governor, stay in your own lane. Therese, as I have mentioned many times, like the bill, dislike the bill, is performing the way I like to see senators perform. She introduces a bill that is obviously the product of a certain amount of a thought, unlike Resolution 56. It's well thought out. You may not like the mechanics of it, but it's well thought out. She goes to great lengths to educate the public about what her bill is about. She has public hearings. She champions her bills. She, in the face of bailout Barnes coming along and publicly calling her a liar, she maintains her cool and continues on, showing a degree of what we used to call stick-to-itiveness, courage, right? Standing up for something. If you don't stand up for something, you'll fall for anything. So regardless of how this bill comes out, I'm giving Therese Terlahi very high marks on this. And then we've got Therese versus the Chief Justice. And the Chief Justice says, well, even though the program's not in place, but we don't have a budget for it. And we have to train our, it's just not the kind. I was just really surprised because Chief Justice Carbolito has been a couple of things since he's climbed on the bench. One, he has been a model of rectitude. Somebody asked me one time what I thought of the 6 months that I was a judge. And my answer was the 6 months that I was a judge was the longest year of my life. Because I tried to do it right. In order to do it right, you kind of got to cloister yourself. You can't hang around with the same people. You really have to be careful not to appear to be favoring something or opposing something or tipping your hand or something like that. And that has always been Chief Justice Carbolito. And not only that, now he comes along and says stuff that don't make sense. Well, we got to train our magistrates. Yeah. And again, I'd like to see how much training Michael Berdalio had when he had that case. So Therese is the speaker. She's the top official in a co-equal branch. She's the top person over at the legislature. She's doing what she's supposed to be doing. She is introducing and championing legislation. It's the provision, the prerogative of members of the legislature to oppose any bill that's introduced. So if Therese introduced it and some members are in opposition to it, that's good. That's the way the system functions. But when a senator introduces a bill, especially the speaker introduces a bill, she shouldn't have to put up with both the heads of the other two branches gratuitously coming along and saying, this bill shouldn't pass. Not a good situation at all. Okay, moving on to today's paper, or as you were not today's paper, tonight's news that will air tonight. Once again, the Pacific News Center is practicing an extreme brand of journalism. They're really got good reporters that are on top of everything here. It's the same old thing again, you know. So she put together a pretty nice schematic on the current law and Bill 112, which is on PNC's website and will be on the tube tonight. And the story goes like this. The second public hearing for Bill 112 is scheduled for 5 this afternoon. In preparation for the public hearing, Speaker Telai has issued the following statement. I am encouraged by the tremendous level of engagement we are receiving, reminding us of the importance of this issue. Based on testimony from our healthcare professionals, we must clarify the legal complexities contained in the bill and the underlying principle that arbitration as mandated by current law is cost prohibitive even for those who may have valid claims. So she's saying we must clarify legal complexities and the underlying principle. So she is listening. She's taken all this in, and she said I think she maybe had Chief Ignacio help her with her press release or something, but she has said from the get-go that she is willing to listen and improve her bill as it goes along.
Oh, she didn't say if my bill doesn't pass this, I'm going to Hawaii?
No.
Okay. That wasn't even the first draft.
Yeah. Bill 112 removes the mandate. Yeah, that's Tom Shea you're thinking of, right? Yeah.
I forgot, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So when they went to the grocery store, only the doctors went to the produce section and stocked up on sour grapes. Therese passed that shelf by. Bill 112 removes the mandate to arbitrate under very specific terms dictated by law, allowing medical professionals to negotiate with the claimants on how many or what type of arbitrators will sit on the panel. The bill also allows for mediation, which is not allowed under current law. If the parties do not agree to mediation or arbitration, the claim will be screened by a magistrate judge without the need for arbitration filing fees or arbitrator costs. Expert medical witnesses will be hired by each party and their testimony presented to arbitrators, mediators, or magistrate just as is done with the current arbitration process. So this is a checklist. It just goes down and rebuts everything that Chief Justice Carbolito put in his testimony. The bill does not remove the screening process meant to mitigate frivolous lawsuits. It enhances the process. The bill does not allow for claims to go directly to court. The bill does not contemplate what is considered malpractice under Guam's legal definition of standard of care, nor make determinations on how doctors should practice medicine. This is already in Guam's laws. In addition, claims filed are kept confidential through the screening process. Magistrate findings are not intended to be deemed, quote, civil judgments. Therefore, they're not reportable to the National Practitioner Data Bank and are described in the bill as shall not be conclusive and can be refuted at trial. Another quote from Therese, I am confident in the judiciary's ability and competence to adjust to the additional mandate in the bill. Well, of course. That's what you're supposed to do, you know? Yeah, good. Right, Therese. And why aren't you, Chief Justice? Why aren't you confident in the ability and competence to adjust to the additional mandate in the bill should it become law? Especially since the judiciary already handles malpractice lawsuits. And the information available from the testimony shows less than 10 cases a year. The bill in our entire system of justice presumes the third branch to be competent and fair in all cases. And other jurisdictions also have pretrial screening panels managed by the judicial branch. The judiciary's need to prepare for implementation of a change in law are valid and expected, as is continuous training for judges and magistrates in the handling of the expansion of duties, as has happened dramatically in the past few years for both magistrates and judges, without looking to any other branch for its training or competency needs. Every expert witness fees are borne by each party under Bill 112, just as they are under current arbitration law, and would not impose an additional financial burden on the courts. The confirmation hearing for the new judge is in a few days, which should help address the court's backlog. In addition, the judiciary is expected to receive a portion of the ARP funds, which should also assist with its finances. If we are sincere about reaching a consensus, we must focus on real facts and not fear. I would reword that. We must focus on real facts and not obstructionism, which is what the doctors are doing. Yeah, they're not saying, well, we would offer these suggestions. They're just saying, no. How does that go, Jose? That sound effect?
Denied.
No.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
That's the doctor's enlightened comment on the bill.
Nope.
Yeah. I urge our entire community to come forward with their stories, questions, and concerns so we can put it on the record for deliberation. It's like I said, that's how it's done. Get everybody in a big room. The bipartisan Bill 112 was sponsored by Tetlahi, Taitigui, Brown, San Augustine, Ada, Nelson, Duenas, Rigel, Shelton, Jose Tetlahi, and Sabina Paris. The Committee on Health will continue to receive testimony throughout the month of July and will be announcing details for additional public hearing on the measure for members to participate in going forward, etc. So good release, Therese. In a sense, I'm kind of relieved when I see that it was a release because it won't be as mangled and garbled as the stuff that PNC turns out sometimes.
Instead of a part-time legislature, we have a part-time journalist.
Exactly. All right. So I want to one more time go into what George Macra said here, because the doctors, the testimony that I've seen so far, one is a glorification of the doctors, and I would not mind at all if we could, when we're arguing policy questions, if we didn't have to PR the people involved. Every time we mention the word government of Guam with regard to what should or shouldn't be done, we don't have to say the hard-working government of Guam employees. And when it comes to doctors, we don't have to say the dedicated people who have dedicated their lives to helping others. That doesn't add any clarity.
Or answer as opposed to.
Yeah.
As opposed to who.
Yeah, right, yeah. It doesn't add any clarity to the argument. So, as I mentioned was it Wednesday, what I saw was a lot of virtue signaling and righteousness preening during the hearing, and self-aggrandizement. I went to medical school and I came back to the island to help my people at great sacrifice to myself. I'm probably only going to make, I probably could have been making $100,000 more in Milwaukee than I'm making here. And this kind of stuff. Just come out and lay out the policy, and your policy arguments is a lot more helpful. Here's what Marcus says. He said that most healthcare providers, or HSPs, abhor unexpected patient mortality and morbidity. But some could care less. They don't care at all about patient mortality. In other words, patients dying. In the U.S., 1% of physicians were responsible for 32% of paid malpractice claims. So I don't know what the relevance of that is here because we don't have malpractice claims. But do we have a small number of very bad doctors, like Mark Macra says, who don't care, that are committing most of the malpractice? If so, then what the other doctors, the ones that are not part of that 1%, they're going to the legislature and they're pounding on the table saying, we've got to defend these folks. We can't let them get sued. We've got to shield the 1% who commit 32% of the paid malpractice claims. That's what they're saying. Now, that's not a very enviable position to be in. Macros goes on to say, an HCP mafia of sorts enforces omertà. That's a good Italian word. It's part of the mafia vocabulary that, you never rat out a made man, right?
Kind of like a silent, what was it, the blue...
The blue wall?
Blue wall.
Yeah. Yeah, omertà. And, when people when soldiers are brought in and made men, they're told, you break omertà, that's a death sentence. You're done. So Macra says that our HSP staff here, our HCP mafia, enforces its own omertà, who attempt to expose even serially injurious provider sacred cows or practices. So if you come forward and you say, this doctor is a butcher, you've broken the code of omertà, and according to Macris, the others are going to be down on you hard. He uses a lot of figures of speech. He talks in terms of sacred cows. Now, I was in India one time, and Indians, I understand, those who practice the Hindu religion believe in reincarnation, that when you die, you will come back again in another life, maybe as a person, maybe as an animal, whatever. And that the cow, the bovine, is the closest reincarnate to the human. So they have special solicitude for sacred cows. So I went to a place called Benares, which is on the Ganges. I think it's on the Ganges, maybe not, which is a sacred river. And if you are able to plunge into that river before you die, you got it made.
You become a cow.
Well,
maybe
not even that. Yeah, your reincarnation is going to work for you really well. And it's an old classical Indian city where you've got some streets that are just this wide, just pedestrians only, etc. You find cows all over that place. And no one is after the cows with a stick or a whip or anything, and wherever the cow goes. Where does a cow get to go in Benares? Wherever he wants to. So that's where that phrase sacred cow comes from. Yeah, you hear it a lot, but sometimes I think it's a good idea to kind of explain these things a little bit. So Macra says we have sacred cows in the medical profession. People that no matter what they do, no one will lift a finger to stop them or discipline them or do anything else. So let's head for Wrigley Field. I don't think there are any cows on the field today.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training. Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Attention men and women in uniform, veterans and reservists. Get ready for the 77th Liberation Hike and Bike. Get up and move with the Silkies Hike. And easy bike along Marine Corps Drive with stops at historic sites and monuments with a super hot cool down at Paseo. Hike rally at 7 a.m. on Liberation Day in Nassen. Bike rally 7 a.m. at Paseo. Let's beat suicide with humor and camaraderie. Sign up at Eventbrite. Look for Silkies Hike Guam 1 and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Made possible by Gotcha 671, Irreverent Warriors, Freedom Grinders, and Veterans Helping Veterans.
So back again to Macris here. He says Public Law 24-84 intended to improve medical practice by shielding peer review findings done at local hospitals, and mandatory arbitration meant to attract and retain qualified, meaning insurable, HCPs have failed, if not backfired. HCP healthcare professional regulatory agency members need to be very, very carefully vetted. That's the Guam Board of Medical Examiners and the Allied Board of Health Professionals, I think it is. Peer Review Committee and Licensing Board adverse action should be unenforceable until there's an evidentiary hearing and a judicial termination. Whistleblowers, doctors, and staff and employees, whether private, classified, or unclassified by law, should be placed on leave or allowed to practice until such determination is made. When industries or professions ineffectively regulate themselves in a manner that creates hazards to health and public safety, lawyers, unfortunately, need to get involved. So, David Lebowski is taking some pretty hard shots at the Guam Board of Medical Examiners also. And Macris is saying, I don't know who he's talking about, but he's saying that doctors are ineffectively regulate themselves in a manner that creates hazards to health and public safety. Lawyers need to get involved. That's what happens when public officials don't do what they're supposed to do. So Dr. George Macris was a very outspoken doctor when he was here, and he may have been a whistleblower himself. He still does cameos on Ray's show, so he still stays in touch. Okay, let's leave the medical profession for a little while. But one other thing I wanted to mention, we've got. If I were a cartoonist, I'd have a picture of David Lebowski attempting to batter down, take a battering ram and open up the door to the courthouse, and the battering ram would be labeled Bill 112, right? Yeah. And then I would have the doctors walking around in a picket line trying to keep Lebowski away from the door. They would be in a picket line carrying signs that said, on strike against medical malpractice.
Hawaii or bust.
So, in a sense, that's what the doctors are doing. They're saying, we're going to go on strike. If you pass that bill, we're out of here. Okay, moving on to the next item on the card. This deals with ships and shipping. And this is Troy over at Candid News, our local muckraker, unloading on Matson Shipping. And we spent a little time talking about the so-called Jones Act here in the program about Matson and APL. And once again, by way of background, there was a statute that passed in 1920, the exact name of which I can't remember. Everybody refers to it as the Jones Act because it's unfortunate because there are about 9 Jones Acts out there floating around dealing with different things. But the key provision, as far as I understand it, well, let's put it this way. Any ship that carries cargo between American ports must be built in the United States, owned by Americans, flagged in the United States, and crewed by American crew members. That's the rule. So if you wanted to haul something from New Orleans to New York, you couldn't do it on Maersk or any one of the Chinese lines or any of these lines flagged in the Marshall Islands or whatever. It would have to be on an American ship, owned by Americans, flagged in the United States, and crewed by Americans. Now, the reason for that was in 1920, the United States thought we've got to maintain a strong merchant marine. We just came through World War I. We know how important it was for us to be able to send ships to Europe to provide things to the Allies to fight the Axis, or not the Axis, to fight the Central Powers. Yeah. So this was the thinking. What it did, what the Jones Act did over there is basically kill American shipping. Now there are only 4 shipbuilding companies in the United States, and it costs about 5 times as much to build a merchant ship in the United States as it costs to build it in Korea. Well, American labor is much more expensive. Korean labor is much cheaper. So the idea, there's the idea of protectionism. Well, in order to protect American industries, we've got to have high tariffs to protect our local manufacturers. Well, we've protected our local shipbuilders right out of business. And since there are only 4 companies building American ships, we've pretty much done away with our own merchant seaman fleet also, because there just aren't that many ships for them to sail on unless they want to sign on a Korean ship or something like that. So any shipping between any American port and Guam, including Honolulu, has to be on an American ship, built in America, owned by Americans, flagged in the United States, crewed by American crews. Now, according to the reading that I've done, the last 3 can be handled, but the American ship dimension cannot. It's just so expensive to build American ships that the only companies that are going to continue to do Jones Act shipping are the ones that are already there. There won't be any new companies coming in and saying, I'm going to spend huge amounts of capital to build a ship that I can sail on these marginally profitable lines. So another interesting thing that I mentioned on the show is that Matson hasn't American ships, but they send them to China for maintenance.
Loophole.
A loophole. So they send them to China for maintenance, where the maintenance is much cheaper, even though when they bring those ships back to the United States, there is a tariff of 50% of the value of the maintenance that they got in China. 50%. You take it over there and you have $1 million worth of maintenance done, you got to pay $500,000 tariff.
Did that include parts?
I think so.
Wow.
So, but Matson apparently did a cost-benefit analysis and determined that instead of taking the ships to American shipyard, no tariff, it's more cost-effective to pay the 50% tariff to have your ships maintained in Korea or China. So that's the mess that we're in right now. Now, Troy kind of lays it out, and I'll just go to Troy's post on Candid News. And Troy is, of course, his usual provocative self. People of the Marianas and of Greater Micronesia, how did your weekend grocery shopping go? You can't hear me from the other side of that hole in your pocket? If you can, I suggest you buy your groceries from one of the military commissaries on Guam. As a matter of fact, it will be well worth your while to purchase whatever it is you need on one of the military bases on Guam, whether that be groceries, goods at the exchange, furniture, cars, parts, or gas. Now, it starts out like, well, boy, Troy's really going to beat up on the military, but not so. And Troy goes on to say, everything is cheaper on base. This is not news. But what you may not have known is why this is so. And it should piss off Guamanians without base access and other islanders who don't have a base on their islands with commissaries and exchanges. Shipping accounts for the single largest markup of the cost of 95% of the products sold in every island of Micronesia. It is more expensive than taxes, and that says something. Considering the government of Guam takes 5% of every business's gross receipts. Let's localize this to accentuate this point. Today it costs $2.49 a pound for regular mango at Palos. This is not the Manila mango, the regular one shipped to Guam. That same mango yesterday in Whiteman, Missouri, cost 58 cents at Walmart. So I'm going to fly to Whiteman, Missouri, load up my suitcase with mango and bring it back here and save a lot of money, right?
You could.
Yeah. Mango, it grows on Guam and not Missouri. Yet it costs more than 500% more here than there. Please consider that in Missouri, stores have to pay federal income tax and state income tax. Customers have to pay state sales tax. Their tax burden is greater than ours, but our price burden far exceeds theirs. Shipping is the culprit. People with military base access, however, know they can fill up a shopping cart at the commissary and expect to pay about $200 when those same products will cost $500 at nearly any grocery store off base. There is a big misconception on Guam that the reason everything is cheaper on base is because the U.S. Navy uses its ships to move produce and products from California to Guam for sale at the exchange and commissary. It doesn't. Matson and APL, the two main shipping lines serving the Marianas and Greater Micronesia, lug those products into Apra Harbor for sale at Anderson and Navy, and they do it for a cost. Matson loves to tell us here in Micronesia that they are the hometown carrier. That what they do and how they operate is for the betterment of our community as a whole. Their prices tell a totally different story. Matson began increasing its per-container shipping prices when it achieved a monopoly in 2012. Generally unbeknownst to most islanders, there was a price per container for civilian shipping through the port, and then a separate price for containers that are meant for the military bases. The rates were generally the same and increased together throughout the monopoly period until APL came onto the scene. Effective September 1, 2014, Matson was charging $5,490 per 40-foot non-refrigerated container to the military. APL undercut their price in both civilian and military market, charging only $4,500 for the same container. That's where the competition started, at least in the military market. Despite the competition from APL in the civilian market, Matson has used its influence in the community to justify its increasing prices, despite years of data tracking increased poverty and hardship for the people of this region. Container prices for the Guam civilian market now are between $7,000 and $9,000. $7,000 and $9,000 civilian, $54.90 for military.
I have experienced that.
While APL has maintained prices at between $4,000 and $6,000. So $9,000 at Matson, maybe $4,000 at APL, $4,500 for military. What is the most disturbing is that while Matson has refused to lower prices in the civilian community, its competition with APL inside the military fence has forced it to cut its prices to the military by 50%. Isn't competition a wonderful thing? In real terms, the reason everything is cheaper at the commissary and the exchange is because the military pays only $2,715 per container. $2,715 to Matson and $2,725 to APL. Matson is charging the civilian people of Guam 3 times what it's charging the military for goods that are shipped to the same darn harbor from the same darn places. Now, why would Matson give the military such a favorable rate? Well, it's a large customer, and generally the bigger the customer, the more leverage it has when it comes to negotiating a price. That would be one reason. And then, of course, as far as the civilian community is concerned, what else are we going to do? Fly back and forth to
Missouri
and fill our suitcases with mangoes and come back. Troy goes on to say Matson is not the hometown carrier. It's a Hawaii-based shipping company that has made billions in the Guam-based trade. It enjoyed a monopoly in our islands for 3 years, sinking our incomes with price increase after price increase after it muscled out Horizon, then was forced to lower prices when APL came onto the scene in late 2014. Since then, Matson has tried 3 times to have APL removed from the market by taking the U.S. Maritime Administration to federal court in Washington, far from the eyes of a public growing poorer by the shipping increases. Defenders of Matson have claimed economies of scale dictate that Matson cannot lower its prices. If that's so, how do you explain APL's lower prices? Matson cannot lower its prices on everyday people of Guam, the Marianas, and Micronesia. How the hell did they lower prices for the military? And if Matson truly was the hometown carrier, why is it charging the civilian populations of the Marianas and Micronesia 300% more for shipping than it's charging the United States military? The Guam military rates prove one very important factor that should be shouted to the hilt by the Guam Chamber of Commerce and every Chamber of Commerce in Micronesia. Competition works. Matson should be called out for trying to use the government to remove its only true competitor, and the governments of the island should join Matson in federal court case in Washington. And Tina should send a resolution to Congressman Grijalvo saying, forget about the insular cases. That's a dry hole. The president has already asked you guys to give us the stuff that we don't need to spoil our deal with the insular cases. But what you can do is change the coastwise shipping laws so that ships sailing to and from Guam from the mainland and Hawaii don't have to be built in American ports. That way we can bring some competition to this route and lower our prices. And I mentioned the other day that I dug out of a magazine, out of a news service from Hawaii called Grassroots, that the estimate in Hawaii is that everybody pays $1,800 a year more to live in Hawaii because of that coastwise shipping law, because of the Jones Act. Repeal the Jones or allow foreign ships to sail to Hawaii, everybody would save $1,800 a year. So next on the card here is Wolf versus journalism. I got to head for Churchill Downs before I get to the Wolf. And I've got Kellis on the line who has a question on the Jones Act.
This Liberation Day, join PBS Guam as we take you village to village, paying tribute to those who've made sacrifices for us to live as we do today. Tune in on July 21st at 9 a.m. and experience over 3 hours of exclusive interviews, musical performances, and more. This celebration of Guam's 77th will air on PBS Guam, KGTF, Channel 12, and streaming on the PBS Guam Facebook and YouTube pages. This special broadcast is made possible by PBS Guam, our generous supporters, and Choice Broadcasting.
Get your shot and win big prizes, Guam. The Office of the Governor and the Guam Visitors Bureau presents Vaccine Win Guam. Protect our community by getting your shot and enter online at visitguam.com/vax for a chance to win. Starting June 14th to July 21st, we'll be giving away weekly prizes of $10,000 cash and a brand new car to lucky residents who are fully vaccinated. That's 6 weeks of Vaccine Win opportunities. Some conditions apply. Log on to visitguam.com/vax for official promo rules or to submit your entry today. Let's Vaccine Win, Guam!
Okay, so here we are. Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, heading down the home stretch of Tall Tales today. And we got one of our top-notch callers here to help me on the home stretch. Good afternoon, Kellis.
Good afternoon, Judge. So I just had a quick question because I'm not a lawyer. So the Jones Act is only for shipment that originates in the United States and ends in the United States.
Right.
So in other words, if a shipment originates in China or originates in Japan, it could come to Guam.
It can.
Oh, see, I thought it was just stuff coming into Guam had to be on a U.S. ship.
No, just coastwise shipping.
Coastline shipping. Guam is considered coastline shipping. I love that.
Coastwise, yeah. Guam is, but the Northern Marianas isn't. And the reason for that is because the covenant between the United States and the Northern Marianas says it doesn't apply. So, the more I spend time with the covenant, I'm asking if they get all this stuff, what have we been doing other than bitching about the insular cases?
Well, it's really important, the insular cases, because you do realize that just proves that the United States are racist.
And that's all they want to talk about, yeah.
There you go. I just want you to know, if you just don't read it, you'll understand it.
Exactly.
See, that's the problem with you, Judge. You pull out your Law and Order book and you actually read the law. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, sometimes if the story's real good, it's just not a good idea to check the law and the facts. It might spoil the story, right, Kelly?
There you go. That's what I'm just trying to tell you. So if you just don't read the law at all, I think that, and then we could do a lot more things here in Guam if we just, because as long as notwithstanding, what if we put a notwithstanding law that says that we could do, anyone could come into Guam shipping wise?
Good call, Kellis.
Okay, I just wanted to ask about that because I didn't realize it was just between the United States.
Yeah.
It's a long way for coastal shipping to Guam.
Yeah, glad I could help out, Kellis. Nice talking to you.
Thanks, Judge. You have a good day.
Yeah. Talking about the covenant, we haven't heard from Drive-Through Jack lately. Is he on a hunger strike?
I think shipping costs have driven the fish sandwich up. Prices
Are all the drive-throughs closed or whatever? But Jack, if you're listening, you ought to call because you asked the question about mutual consent for the Northern Marianas and the covenant. And the answer to that question is sort of. But the next time you call in, I'll give you chapter and verse on that one. Okay, let's see. I got somebody else here, Churchill Downs. Who else but another Joe, who wants to know if the Jones Act applies to compact impact payments. More than likely. Good afternoon, another Joe.
No, Uncle Bob, no. So I'm trying to understand the Jones Act issue. So basically, you're saying that nothing from China can come straight to Guam. Is that what you're saying, right?
I believe that's what he's saying.
Okay, but it can go to Hawaii first, or it can go to it'll go to what port does it have to go to first before it can go to the U.S. come to our port?
What did you say? What's your question, another Joe?
Where would a shipment from China? We get a lot of things made in China. Where does it go to first before it can come to be shipped on Guam? To Guam.
Well, it could sail straight from China to Guam if that's the route it's on. But shipping routes are you have professionals who figure these things out where they make the most money carrying cargo. So if you had a whole ship full of cargo for Guam sailing out of China, you'd probably sail straight to Guam. But you might have some cargo for Japan, Australia, Indonesia, whatever, and you'd hit these other ports on your way to Guam. Is that what you're after?
If the Jones Act did not apply to Guam, how would that be different? How would that be?
Well, as I explained to Kellis, the Jones Act does not apply to any ship sailing from a foreign country to Guam. It only applies to ships sailing from the United States mainland or Hawaii or Alaska to Guam. It's coastwise shipping. So
it does not affect our overhead. It doesn't affect our prices at all, or does it?
It really does, because the only ships that can sail between mainland Hawaii and Guam have to be built in America, crewed by Americans, flagged in America, and owned by Americans. And as I explained, it costs 5 times as much to build a ship in the United States as it does to build a ship in China or Korea. American seamen, being an American merchant seaman is an extremely good job. It pays very, very well. We pay and I suspect other countries, you could hire seamen from Malaya, Bangladesh, some of these other countries for much, much less. So the cost, the operating cost for these foreign lines is much lower than the operating cost for American lines.
Hey, thanks for your answer, Uncle Bob. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I missed you guys Thursday and Friday. I'll try to be more punctual.
Well, it's your loss. Thanks for calling, another Joe.
Okay, take care.
Okay, I've got Wolf versus Journalism. I'm probably going to have to pick that up tomorrow. And I almost forgot, I have in my hand here the July 1 issue of a monthly magazine called Pacific Island Times that I've been reading for quite a while. And it's a very good magazine. It's only $1.25. If you pick it up and you look on page 6, you'll see someone who looks very, very familiar. I'll tell you a little bit more about this tomorrow. That's it for today. See you tomorrow.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
CPAC 2021. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. Former President Trump takes the stage at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Dallas, where he's criticizing his successor, President Joe Biden's decision to end border security policies, among other topics. Fox's Evan Brown reports from CPAC in Dallas.
Donald Trump on the stage at CPAC wasted no time targeting the Biden administration's reversal of his border and migration policies, leading to mass increases of illicit border crossings that Texas officials are now trying to tackle.
Right here in Texas, we are the epicenter of a border and migration crisis unlike anything anyone has ever seen before in the history of our country.
The former president also addressed rising crime, the defunding of law enforcement, and cancel culture, specifically his lawsuit against Facebook and Twitter.
And gas prices rising 5 cents in the last 2 weeks, with the national average for a gallon of regular gas at $3.21.
Despite a certain amount of economic recovery,